Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 39 of Monster, and if we have another cliffhanger after the end of this episode, I'm going to jump through that window! Tired of cliffhangers! We've had a month of cliffhangers, a solid month, 36, 37, 38, and this is 39, and I guess 35 was kind of a cliffhanger too, but... So I'm here to talk about episode 39 and to watch it with y'all. I've got some comments, so that's exciting. From Patreon and from YouTube, so that's exciting. We aren't even done with the entire ordeal at the library. We're not even done. Nope. We ended the episode last week with Tenma rushing towards the curtain as the curtain falls on Nina and Schubert. I don't think Schubert's gonna live. I think he's gonna die. Roberto's dead, apparently, and Tenma's the one that shot him. So, and then both he and Nina tried to make a go at Johan, and that just failed miserably. So, which I want to talk about before we start, because we have these comments here. Ordinary Critic talked about from episode 35. They were the older comment, saying that after Rudy's analysis, Lunge says he is alone. He's saying that Tenma is alone, but he says that he himself is alone as Tenma. But Ordinary Critic points out that what Lunge is actually doing is projecting his own insecurities in the form of Tenma. So when he says he's alone, Lunge kind of is too, right? So I thought that was fascinating, the idea that Lunge is trying to pose as Tenma, but a lot of his own insecurities and problems are getting pushed onto this Tenma persona, which is just... I said in the comments with somebody else that Lunge is very punchable. Like, I have the urge to just punch him sometimes. I'm like, why can't you be better? So, why couldn't you be L? You know. Alex Cornejo, though, I did want to talk about this, especially in relation to Johan, because at this point, Johan's got away. He's got away. Who knows where he is? But if Roberto is dead, Alex Cornejo points out that Roberto has technically been Johan's means of finding out what Tenma's doing. He's been trailing both Tenma and the Red Hindenburg this entire time, as well as Reichwein, right? He's been trailing all of these leads to keep track of Tenma. And so while I've been concerned that there's some kind of weird supernatural element, there may still be, that's, you know, embedded deeply into the story, the more realistic explanation is that Johan just knows about Tenma because Roberto's been giving him information. The thing that's crazy is that Roberto, if he's dead now, how will Johan keep up with Tenma? How is he going to get tipped off about Tenma if Roberto's dead? Because Roberto seems like he was his right-hand man, so what do we do with that? So that's going to be the big question of this all. Like, what do we do now that Roberto's gone? How is Johan going to keep track of Tenma? And if he can't keep track of Tenma, what do we do with that information? Can we realistically and logically explain it like we did with Roberto? So that's a really good point to bring out, Alex. And I also want to make note that everyone in the Discord, I've been getting Roberto's name wrong like half this time, calling him Ricardo. And everybody was like, well, just keep calling him something different, like Rolando, Richardo. I don't know. Now we don't have to, so. But also, pointing out that Johan wasn't afraid of Red Hindenburg's threats because she knew that Roberto was there the whole time. We talked in the Discord about how Tenma didn't see or notice Roberto climbing up that damn bookshelf, but Roberto establishes that he's an assassin. He's a hitman. That's kind of his job. He snuck up behind, not Mueller. I guess it was Mueller. It snuck up behind him, like, in the mansion. So he's been able to sneak about. So there's that. And also Tenma's head. We talked about how in the series, Tenma, when he gets into like doctor mode, he gets so hyper-focused, he kind of tunes out of everything else. And in the moment of him like deciding, do I kill Johan or not, he was so hyper-focused on that, he couldn't sense Roberto behind him. So that's my headcanon, is that one, Roberto was pretty skilled already despite being a big guy. And two, that Tenma was so focused he wasn't even paying attention to anything else around him. I think Lottie could have snuck up behind him and he wouldn't even know. And she's just a student, right? So there's that. But also, Sunray points out that Tenma, it's interesting that he, as a child, remembers wanting to be known, and then as an adult, he doesn't want to be known. So it's a very interesting contrast. I liked that a lot. Little Dude and several others in the Discord were like, how did you get, when I was translating in episode 36, they're like, how'd you get the name, like, A Bitch Who Has No Name? For being the title of the monster book. And I was putting in, like, either Kiera or Quera into the Czech translation for Google Translate. And Little Dude and several in the Discord were like, it's supposed to be Katera, which means witch. So monster, which has no name. And I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to call Johan the bitch with no name from now on. But I'm glad that you pointed that out, little dude. That was very nice to know. And then, in addition to that, the manga, apparently, we were talking in the comments with little dude, the manga for Monster, as well as the anime, it reminds me a lot of Banana Fish. I've collected Banana Fish slowly over the last several years. It's like been a dang scavenger hunt trying to find the manga for Banana Fish because it's really hard to find in the English translation or to get the full set. And Monster's kind of the same way, although, fingers crossed, knock on wood, I've been lucky so far. But I didn't realize that Monster doesn't have an official English release on DVD or Blu-ray. Why? Why would you not have a release of this series? It's amazing. How? And I realized Banana Fish is the same way. I mean, Banana Fish is on Amazon Prime, but you can't find it anywhere else. I'm like, come on, show. Like, it's just, these two series are so good. How would you not have a release? Do you not? I've seen some junk on DVD and Blu-ray. You don't think people would buy this? Huh, you sure? Are you sure? So that's just fascinating to me. I hope one day they do get a release on Blu-ray or DVD. That would be really cool to like have like a Neon Genesis like special edition, special binding. I'd get that. That'd be great. But yeah, I thought that was interesting to note. There are some similarities. Hopefully this series doesn't end nearly as tragically as Banana Fish, but who knows? Who knows, right? And then finally, Roifer and Sunray both talked about anima and animus, right? And the anima and animus are actually Latin masculine and feminine forms of the noun animus, which means wind. And I was just thinking like the two winds that come in, like this gale, this monstrous wind that comes in to change everything. And they said that anima means breath of life or soul, and animus means the mind or the seat of consciousness. And I was like, well, that's Nina and Johan. Nina is like the breath of life or soul. She has this big heart and compassion, and she seems to be maybe the soul that keeps Tenma grounded throughout all of this. Whereas Johan is the mastermind. He's the seat of consciousness. He's on the throne at Kinderheim, right? Looking over everything. So, and he keeps pointing to his mind to shoot him, like the seat of consciousness. Like that just got me really excited because I'm like, there's so much symbolism there. And then Sunray pointed out that in context of the psychologist Carl Jung, which I agree with, there is some gender orientation with it psychologically. But yeah, I have no clue what to expect because like I said, thanks to Anthony, who gives me these files to watch, all it says is Monster 39. There's no thumbnail, there's no preview, there is nothing to tell me what this episode is about. And that is exciting and terrifying at the same time. So, let's all be excited and terrified together, shall we? I'm so excited. I hope you all are too. But I'm going to throw this to Huck, tell him to go lay down, and we're going to just see what happens. So, I've talked enough. We're going to start episode 39 of Monster and see what we get. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's just let's find out. My, how the plot thickens. This was a great episode. Oh my god. This was a very satisfying episode after and yes, it is can we call it a cliffhanger? Maybe, but it's not as bad as it's been the last 3 damn weeks. I feel like this is a very satisfying episode because we have successfully reached the halfway point of the series. The curtain has closed upon one act and it's risen upon other, and there's setup, there's things happening. We're getting a squad together, the squad's breaking up. There's lots of things going on. And the cool thing is that there's more storybook fairy tale elements from Czechoslovakia that are going to be creepy as hell, apparently. I'm just like, those of you in the comments that are Czechoslovakian, how are your stories? How are your fairy tales? I'm just like, what? Yes. I just, apparently you can't read bedtime stories from that country because they're all somewhat plagued with perhaps evil spirits. Who knows? I was worried back when we had the entire storybook read to us. I was like, well, why don't we read the whole storybook right now? I'm like, that seems like really too early in this series. But the fact that there are other fairy tale elements that are getting incorporated in, that book of the monster may not be the only book that's a problem. It may be other books from, and maybe it's not just specifically that book, but it's just the fact that that story is from a particular part of their lives that is affecting them a certain way. Maybe. I feel like we need to talk about that as an option in this, right? So if we're going to go by that logic, it could be some things that we have here. So Nina, I'm going to put Nina and Johan together here. The fact that the idea of their fairy tale childhood and that leading into trauma. So it very well could be that it's not Obluda, it's not that particular book that affects them, because honestly, the book that Johan read and fainted from is not the same book that Nina read and got freaked out by. They're not the same text, right? Or maybe it is the same text because Lottie ends up checking it out, but Lungi and them got another copy of it. So either it's that textbook that's the one that causes all the problem, or maybe it's just the stories within it that causes chain reaction that makes them remember, because Nina has a very spotty memory, and that is most likely because of trauma. Like, it is a traumatic response that she forgets things, and I was a little frustrated by it at first, because I was like, how do you forget that Tenma was there? Y'all had guns pointed at Johan like 10 minutes ago, but it is in tune with her character that she struggles with memory, and it's like an automatic response that her body does to help her forget and stay sane. And the thing of it is, I don't think that Johan forgets. I think that's the big difference between the two of them. So we'll talk about Nina. I'm going to put Nina right here. The idea of Nina with trauma and memory. Because yeah, she lost a lot of her memory right after she shot Johan in the face and was in the hospital. She lost a lot of that memory there. She kind of blanked out her memory when she was raised by the Fortners. Up through that, she seems to like have trouble remembering certain things because that's just how her body works. And so her and honestly, we the audience, it was kind of just such a chaotic setup in the last episode that we're like, okay, Nina's here, she's gung-ho, but Nina came to the library looking for Johan on her own. She already had this mission in mind, and then when she got there, all of a sudden, here comes this old guy that she doesn't know, Dieter that she does know, saying that there's something going on in the library. They're looking for Tenma, they're looking for Johan. They don't know for sure if either of them are in the library, but they think, and then she rushes in there and just in the moment sees Johan and sees Tenma, but then all of this stuff happens. So it was a very chaotic situation. So the fact that she thinks that Tenma was there, but she's not sure until Reichwein confirms it, until it does get confirmed. So, I mean, Nina's memory is affected by her trauma, and it is frustrating as the audience because we're like, Nina, put two and two together. But the funny thing about that is that Johan does not seem to have a spotty memory. Johan seems to have a very good memory. And so that, in some regards, check my wheel there, Whiteboard Coon is being a little funky. But yeah, in that regard, we have the idea that Johan, that's set up there we go. But there is this idea that Johan having a really good memory is not a good thing, because that fuels his passion, that fuels his vengeance, that fuels like his apathy as well. And so yeah, there's a lot of problems with that, with having a good memory. Sometimes, ignorance is bliss. And for Johan, it doesn't seem like he has had a very blissful experience throughout his life, because he seems to remember everything. But man, there were so many moments in here that were satisfying, but there were so many moments that were frustrating. And I think that this episode starts out with such a frustrating trope. Whenever you end on a cliffhanger and you don't know the ending of a character's arc, and then it starts at being like, there were victims, and it's a whole new scene. I'm like, go back, tell us what happens. And luckily, it did go back and show us what happened. At least with Schubert, we assumed that Tenma just rescued Nina, and that was it. She was the last one out, which means he got Schubert out first, which was smart because he's an old man, and then came back and got Nina. But I see now why the episode last week ended the way it did, because it immediately cuts to this. So I'll be very curious when I get the manga. I'll tell you all. I'll show you the manga and tell you what's different. I'll be very curious when I get the manga copy to see how these chapters play out and to see what that looks like. Like, that'll be very, very interesting. So yeah, that'll be cool when we get there. When we get there. But yeah, so 5 died. I'm gonna start a little thingy over here to kind of recap. So what we know. So what we know from this episode, we know that 5 died. We know that Roberto is presumably one of them, but we don't know. We don't get a body. We don't get a body, no death. They don't say a word about Roberto being among the dead, right? I was wondering with Lunge investigating if the coroner or somebody was going to identify, like, oh, this guy wasn't on the list to be at the party. I have a feeling that's going to come back. I wonder if at some point the police is going to find out, hey, there was a guy here that wasn't on the list that was one of the dead. And that's going to be kind of a catalyst for, you would think it would be a catalyst for Lunge to go, oh, why was there this rando here that wasn't supposed to be there? What could he have ties to? But I don't know. Lunge is a complete wild card. And I want to go through his character in this episode, but he was like, his punchable levels were up here because I was like, what are you doing, Lunge? But yeah, I don't know what we're going to do with that. So Roberto's a big question mark here. Like, is Roberto dead? You would think that he got shot in the chest by Tenma, that he would be, but what if he lives through it? What if Roberto lives through Tenma shooting him and has like this reawakening like Johan had, like Martin had, and suddenly he's like, you come see it too, and gets all it like, what if that happens? I don't know. I'm just like, this series makes you question everything. It's like no body, no death. You cannot, that's all you got to go on, right? We haven't seen Heckle in a long time too. Heckle's way back wherever, but it just hit me now that I'm like, he's still alive. Maybe he'll come back into this at some point. But yeah, 34 injured, there are 5 dead, and we see all these people like wondering what is going to be found out from the discussion. I'm glad that they mention that Tenma saved them. I'm glad that came out, that's what the people said. The frustrating part with Lunge is that you have multiple eyewitnesses say, oh, this Asian man saved us. They put 2 and 2 together that there was one Asian man there. They have the rifle that Tenma supposedly had there. They're like, okay, Tenma was there. But Lunge, every time he introduces Tenma to all these people, he's like, oh, this is the man that was trying to assassinate Schubert. I'm like, you don't know that. I'm like, that's just, you have no way of knowing for sure that Schubert was the one that Tenma was going to try to assassinate. You have no way of knowing that. You're just saying that because that's what you believe, but no one else is backing that up. Whereas you have all of these people that are witnesses there saying Tenma saved them. So I just was like, Lunge, what the fudge are you doing? Why are you doing this? What makes it worse is that Lunge is in many regards competent. That's what makes it so frustrating, is that Lunge is not a terrible detective. He's actually really smart, and he follows clues, and he says some things in this episode that I'm like, yes, that is a very intelligent line of thinking. It's just when it comes to Tenma, he doesn't want to admit he could be wrong. And I'm like, dude, Rudy read you like a freaking book, right? And then we have the IV drip, and we see Nina in the bed, and they say the fire was started by gasoline. They are trying to find the culprit as soon as possible. I do think that it is symbolically interesting that you have Nina back in bed like Johan and her were at the beginning of the series, and you have her with the head bandage like Johan had, and then when she gets up, she reaches forward, and that's the same exact motion that Johan did when he woke up. He reached forward. He was reaching for her in that moment in the original episodes, but here she's just reaching forward, trying to find someone. Trying to reach for Tenma, right? So it's fascinating. But yeah, we're going to skip this OP. Get out of there, and we go to the scene of the library, right? Of course, they have to make the grand symbolic statement of saying, oh, well, it might be the wisdom of humanity, but when it's burned, they mean nothing, right? Meaning that, you can gather all this knowledge. It's a very good symbolic reference to, you can gather evidence and knowledge, but if it's not shared, it's useless. I mean, obviously, if it's destroyed, it's useless. Like, the books are useless there. But if you don't share the knowledge and share your wisdom, it will not be of any use to anybody. And I think that's a nice symbolism of the library, too, because the library had all of this knowledge and wisdom contained within it, but it wasn't accessible to everyone. There were books that were filed away in like the forbidden sections and all of this and preserved. So some of that knowledge was withheld. And if it's withheld, no one can share it. Nobody has access to it. Nobody can gain anything from it. So I feel like that's a nice little symbolic gesture what's happening. And it happens again with the apartment. We'll get to Johan's apartment, right? But I like the symbolic reference of what the library represents, right? So they go through everything, and the one damn good thing about all of this is that Rudy and Reichwein were very worried about the prints on the sniper rifle, and they are worried that if they get prints off the sniper rifle and connect it to Tenma, then they're screwed. Now, you would think they don't know. What they don't know is that Roberto had control of the sniper rifle as well, so there's multiple sets of prints, which would create evidence of doubt, right? But luckily and unluckily, it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we can't get Roberto's prints off the sniper rifle because it's burned in the fire. But on the other hand, if you can't get prints of Tenma's, then you're fine. Now, he says, I don't know if we can lift good prints, so I kind of hope that they can't, because at this point, Roberto is maybe dead, so it doesn't matter in the long run. But I just don't want them to get prints of Tenma's, because that's all Lunge needs to pin it on him. And then, like Rudy said, then they're useless. There's nothing they'll be able to do. And I do like what Lunge says here. He says, there is no crime without clues. Like, nobody can just disappear without a trace, right? So he's like, there is clearly clues here somewhere. And they have the cufflink. Now I'm trying to think what the cufflink looks like. He picks it up. He's like, a cufflink was left here. And let's see. Do we see anything on it? There's like a little trace of something, but we can't see what it is. It's like a square. I can't see. Like, someone was there. So again, we don't know whose cufflink it is. Would Johan wear cufflinks? What's the deal? We don't know. Is that going to lead us to anything? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if the cufflink was a red herring and it doesn't lead anywhere. And he's like, no one can leave without leaving a trace. If someone can do that, they're not human. And then the one guy's like, well, what would they be if they could? And he's like, then he's a demon. And there's no such thing in this world. Therefore, there is no criminal we can't arrest. So there is this concept that Lunge has, that if you leave no trace, then you're not human. You're a demon, which Johan has said he doesn't exist. He doesn't want to exist. He doesn't exist. He leaves no trace. But he says that there is no such thing as demons. No such thing as demons. No criminal that can escape or not be arrested. So he's like, there's always going to be some way we can arrest someone. We just have to find the right evidence, the right clues, etc., etc. We were talking to H-Banana 7. We were talking about this in the comments. This show gaslights you hard into wondering if Johan actually exists or not, right? Especially once the parents disappear. I'm like, what the hell? He's already gotten rid of them. I'm like, once they disappear from the picture, I'm like, were they there to begin with? Has this all been an illusion? Is this the supernatural element? Like, the show it gaslights you into questioning your sanity over whether Johan exists or not. It really makes you question it. So it's like, but he has to because of the mom, right? We'll get to the mom. We got a long way to go before we get to the mom. But yeah, so he's like, were you able to get an interview with Mr. Schubert? And they're like, they end up going to the hospital, and they're like, we advise you not to see Schubert because he's really having trouble. What amazes me with Lunge in this is that Lunge, at times, Lunge is very socially awkward and doesn't properly know how to interact with people. But then at other times, he's not bad. He actually does a fairly good job. Like when he goes up to Carl, he's not demanding. He doesn't shove his way through. He's manipulative. He just goes, oh, I'm sorry that your father went through so much trouble. Like he seems apologetic. He knows how to manipulate people, which is problematic, right? Because it's Lunge. So, and then of course he frames it as, this is the man who tried to assassinate your father. And he shows in the picture, and of course Carl doesn't know who he is. But what Carl wants him to do is find Johan. He's like, hey, my dad's secretary pieced out. That seems a little suspicious. Why don't you go find him? At least I hope Carl is somewhat suspicious of Johan. I would really like Carl to team up with Lottie and the others. I feel like Carl, having been with Johan, you would think he would know things, but then Johan slips in and out so easily from situations that he probably hasn't done anything but make small talk with Carl and not say much of relative importance. But I still hope that Carl tries to help out Lottie and Rudy and Gillen in the end. I hope that he does. I don't know if that'll be, especially if somehow his dad ends up dying. I'm amazed Schubert's alive. I thought Schubert was dead. I was like, he's not going to be alive when this starts, but he was, because he has a role to play, right? It's just insane. And then Lunge being like, Johan, he's like, Johan should have been in the ceremony with my dad, but we can't find where he went. And this is where Lunge kind of goes, both Rudy and Tenma have talked about Johan. And at the time, I think that Lunge tried to justify that Rudy was maybe lying on Tenma's behalf because they were former classmates, they were friends, they'd worked together. I think that Lunge was trying to think, oh, well, Rudy's just saying this because he's a friend of Tenma and he's going along with it. But here now, you have someone totally unrelated to Tenma that's never seen him before in his life that's saying that Johan Liebert exists. And Lunge suddenly like, well, you're just a random bystander, but you're saying the same thing Tenma and Rudy has. So he has to be real, right? He has to be real. So you would think that would grab Lunge's attention, his curiosity, being like, But Lunge is so unexpressive, you never know what he's thinking. Like his face gives away no emotions. So you don't know if he's believing any of this, if he's just throwing it all out in the gutter, if he's just like, whatever. He just says he'll look for him. And so then they go, this was the room that Johan Liebert was renting. So he obviously had made arrangements with someone, had rented a room, but there's no trace of him in the room. And he left 2 weeks ago. So he checked out. So he supposedly checked out 2 weeks prior. Now, where he was staying at, he could have been staying with the Red Hindenburg. Could have been staying there, but I don't know the timeline of how soon he killed her before the ceremony. So he could have been staying at the Red Hindenburgs if that was an option, but I don't think so because he leaves the place like he's never coming back to it. So did he rent another place? Did he stay hidden at somebody's house? Was he staying in Schubert's mansion the whole time? We just didn't know it. Was he staying in a car or an alleyway? Where was he? Because him checking out 2 weeks ago, where was he? I mean, him checking out 2 weeks ago kind of makes you believe that he did it solely so he could place himself away from the scene of the crime to make himself not suspicious. And he leaves the place entirely spotless, like he never was there. There's nothing on the beds. There's nothing at the desks. There is no trace of him anywhere in that room. It's spotless, right? And what's amazing, what's frustrating and amazing is that Lunge makes no notes, not a one. And on the one hand, you would think, on the one hand, you'd be like, oh, well, he's just not moving his hand because he has nothing to say. But even when he says no data available, the hand never moves. He makes a conscious decision to not remember anything about Johan for later in that room. He doesn't type with his fingers, no data available, the room is empty, it seems like there's no sign of him anywhere to remember that. He doesn't move his hand, so he doesn't have to remember it later. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. He's like, there's no chance, no trace. And then that's when they find out he wasn't in the law school registry. So I'm a little worried about the security of this college university that they can't keep track of non-students. They're just like, he wasn't a real student. So he was just perusing campus grounds, but because he was some pretty rich white boy, some pretty rich looking white boy, nobody batted an eye. Nobody cared because he didn't look suspicious at all. He was just a pretty boy. He wasn't a real student. And they're like, have you contacted his parents in Offenbach? And they're like, they're gone as well. He's like, nixed them. Either nixed them or were they there to begin with? We don't know! And this show's just gaslighting us into making us question whether he's existing or not. And so they don't know many of the neighbors. Yeah, just conveniently use people that didn't know the neighbors well to be your foster parents. It's such a frustrating episode, but it's so good. And like, should we take fingerprints? And he's like, nothing's going to show up. And he's like, there's no data available, which again is his narrative. They could possibly have taken fingerprints off the room. They could have, but his narrative is there's no point. So I'm just like, Lungay, you're making up, you're deciding whether or not things have value or not. This is the first time, he says. The first time I've seen a room with so few traces of a person living in it. Yeah. And he says, I am Johan. I am Johan Liebert. Who am I? I was here, but I don't exist. And then he says the whole thing about being a demon. Just says a demon, ? And then he laughs. He laughs because it's like, this thing shouldn't exist. This thing doesn't exist. So what do we do with this information? If the only option is that he's a demon, we know demons don't exist. So what do we do with that? That laugh, it's just like, a part of me wants Lungay to get fascinated by Johan enough to chase Johan, just like Tenma's chasing him. So maybe he'll come face to face with him. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where Lungay and Johan come face to face. I don't know. Part of me thinks that Johan and Lungay will meet up at some point in the series, and then part of me thinks they'll never meet up, and it'll be him and Tenma at the very end, and I'm like, that's where I'm at right now, and I don't know what else to do with it. But we go back to Lottie and Nina, and I am glad that Lottie is there. I'm glad that Lottie is there for Nina. I'm glad she's a friend. That was really nice, but it was frustrating for Nina to forget about Tenma at first. And part of me wondered if Nina didn't want to mention Tenma because she didn't want Lottie to know his name so that she would, accidentally say it to the police or something. There was part of me that was thinking that. But then, again, Nina's memory, she kind of forgot that he was there. She thinks that he was there, but she forgot. It's not until she talks to Reichwein that she really, remembers him. But she lifts up her hand, doing the pose like Johan did, and reaches up and grabs Tenma's hand, and he's like, Nina, and he like goes to get her. Yeah. And then there we go. She's like, there was definitely someone there. And then so we got back to Schubert, where Lungay's questioning him, and Schubert doesn't really want to talk. And again, I think Lungay is smart to note that, no, this man's fully conscious. He knows exactly what he's saying. He's just, Lungay has messed with enough people in his lifetime as a detective to know when people are cut off, when they're withdrawn, when they're not wanting to answer questions, things like that. And of course, he claims that Tenma's the man that was going to assassinate him. And of course, Schubert's not going to answer because he knows Tenma's the guy that rescued him. He knows who the real assassin is. But what's so frustrating is that Schubert doesn't tell Lungay about Johan. He doesn't tell him. And I don't know if I'm not sure if Schubert seems a lot like Junkers, where he doesn't want to mention him. It's almost like, saying Bloody Mary to the mirror 3 times. You don't want him to appear. So I feel like Schubert is afraid of mentioning Johan, because if he mentions Johan, like Junkers, he's afraid Johan's going to come back to kill him. Like the monster's going to return. And the scary thing is that it is fairy tale-esque, right? Because it's almost like Junkers summoned Johan back, met him up in the warehouse where Tenma stumbled upon it too, and died by his hands somehow. And it seems like Schubert's afraid of the same thing happening to him, that if he mentions Johan, he's going to show up and kill him. Like a freaking fairy tale monster, right? And so then Lungay is like, okay, then we'll leave. And he asks one more thing about where Johan Liebert is. And you can tell that Carl's like, oh, I don't know if we should mention Johan. That's a tender subject. And the thing about the 3 frogs, what the hell? He tells him to get out, right? And so before he talks to Carl, the one guy, I love this one guy that is walking with Lunge, by the way, the guy that's following him. He's the one that was like giving Lunge the look that was incredulous, like, who the hell are you? I kind of like him because he's very much like us, the audience, questioning, being like, hey, what about this and this? And Lunge's answering the questions. He says, that's the end of the financial emperor, the vampire Bayern. And Lunge's like, nah, he was pretty conscious. And so they're like, what does he ask him there? He says, can we get a list of other witnesses to get testimonies? He's like, what did you mean? What did he say there? He says, let's talk. He says, those little eyes of man. He's like, let's talk to some other witnesses. Do you have a list of the victims? And he's like, oh, yes. And then he says, but what did you mean by that? He says, testimonies that a demon like Tenma was rescuing people. He's like, is this another one of his personalities? So yeah, so I'm like, the demon like Tenma. I was like, Lunge's making Tenma out to be a demon. And I was like, what are we doing? But I'm trying to give him this like multiple personality disorder or DID or whatnot. And then that's when he sees Nina's name on the list of the victims. And of course, he remembers Nina from the murder case with her foster parents, right? And he's connecting it all together. Now, I think that Lunge believes that Nina might be working with Tenma, which she kind of is. So I feel like he thinks that's how she's connected, right? He doesn't know at this point that Nina and Johan are twins. I don't think he knows that because I think Anna and Johan were the twins back at the hospital and now it's Nina. So I think he doesn't realize that Nina is who she is. He just thinks she's somebody that's an accomplice working with Tenma. And her being on the scene at the library reads even more suspicious. So of course he'd want to look for her and question her, but luckily she's gone. Because at first I was kind of excited. At first I was like, oh, he'll find her and she can explain what's going on. But then I'm like, no, Lunge's not the type of person that you can just explain things to. So it's probably good that she gets out of there and she's not there any longer. Probably. Yep. And then he does the whole thing with his hands, taking the registry of her, not Johan, but her. And then we cut to Reichwein. Now, at first, he says, the story I heard from Tenma matches up completely with what you told me. And that's when she's like, oh, Tenma. Oh, yeah. He's like, that's right. He showed up when I was working on a series of cases. So, yeah. So the thing of it is, it was a little confusing in the scene because I felt like the two of them should know each other better, but they literally met for 5 seconds. So they literally met for 5 seconds before a fire and everything. So what ends up getting shared between Nina and Reichwein is that Reichwein confirms the story about Tenma with her. And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, by the way, I've been working with Tenma. Here's what I know about him. Your story in the library matches up with him. So everything seems like it's all kosher. He's like, I was working on a series of cases when he showed up. And she's like, okay. And he's like, on that day, I thought Tenma was going through with his assassination plot at the library to assassinate Johan. And I ran after him. And by the way, that large fire, we don't know if Tenma or Johan were there. And she's like, no, Tenma was there. So, yeah, she's like, everything matches up. She's like, no, Tenma was actually there. She saw him. We just don't know about Johan. And that's when Reichwein says, stop chasing him. So Reichwein, basically, he wants them all to work together. He's like, separating and working by ourselves is not a good idea. Richard tried to do that and Richard died. He's like, you don't seem to feel like you're in a mental state to work by yourself. So let's not do that. Work with people. I do appreciate that Reichwein and Rudy are trying to go about this in a like, you know, united we stand, divided we fall mentality. They're trying to be like, look, the more feet we can get on the ground, the more information we can find, the faster we can solve this. If we do it by ourselves, it's not only dangerous against Johan, but we're not going to be able to get as much information as we could working together. So I don't think Reichwein and Rudy are wrong, but like Nina says, she's like, there's no time. Johan's kind of a loose cannon. We don't know what he's going to do. We can't sit around and wait. We have to act now. And Tenma's acting now. So if we wait, Tenma's going to strike without us knowing it, and it's just going to make things worse. So, but I do appreciate Reichwein wanting to keep her safe. That he's like, I don't want you doing this by yourself. He's not an opponent you can safely pursue. And he's like, the police aren't of much help. I'm glad that Reichwein acknowledges that the police are going to do nothing. He's like, just stay at my place and then we can go from there. Right? So then we come back to Dieter. And God, the callbacks. Dieter giving her the sandwiches. And the ham sandwiches are the exact same ones that Tenma made for her before they ended up parting ways back when he first rescued her from her foster parents, from Mueller and Murr. Yeah, same sandwiches, same type. And it almost jogs your memory. I like the dynamic that Dieter and Nina have together. But God, Dieter going with Nina gives me the worst feeling. The worst feeling because he's a little kid. I know Dieter needs to see Tenma. I know he mentally is like, you know, me and Tenma, we're buddy old pals. I can keep him on the straight and narrow if he sees me. But I'm like, Dieter, you being there is like, you'll be the first one to die. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want Dieter to die in this series. And him going along with her to track down Johan of all people makes me terrified. I'm like, Dieter, why? And you know, Reichwein's going to be freaked out, right? So they talk about wanting to see Tenma again. And she's like, I want to see Tenma. Mm-hmm. And we have the wind blowing, which is funny. We talk about anima, animus, and the idea they're both the winds blowing through. So we have our squad, right? We have our squad of Nina and Dieter are together, going after Tenma to find him and Johan. We have Rudy and we have Reichwein that I'm sure are going to keep working together to probably find the same thing along with Johan. And then my hope is that Lottie and Carl are going to team up to do the same. That's my hope. We have all these different pairs, right? We have all these different pairs, which is funny because the story of Monster is about a monster that splits in two. So we have Nina and Dieter, we have Rudy and Reichwein. I'm hoping we have Lottie and Carl, and then Tenma and Johan, obviously. And even Lunge's working with this one guy. So we have different pairs throughout the series that are interacting with one another and different pairs themselves. So it's just crazy. But this episode is called The Hell in His Eyes. I find it very ironic that Carl's like, let's go to Asia. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, author, what are we doing? But yeah, and then that's when he says, you fought enough, Dad. And that's when he says, bridge, the three frogs. He says, I could see hell in his eyes. Hell was living inside the eyes of a living human. So, yeah, now the question is the hell in his eyes. Mm-hmm. The hell in his eyes. The funny thing is, we all believe, 99.9%, that the hell in his eyes, he's talking about Johan, because Johan asked him to stare into his eyes and say, what do you see? The funny thing is, he doesn't outright say, Johan, I saw hell in Johan's eyes, so he's been looking at both Johan and Tenma. So is the hell in his eyes the hell in Johan's eyes? Is it the hell in Tenma's eyes? We don't know for sure. We think it's Johan's because that would make sense with the plot, but because there's that little tiny sliver of room for doubt, it's like, what do we do with this? So he gives him a message to take to Dresden to tell Tenma, and that's where they said to meet up at, right? I do appreciate that he gives Carl, he says, your mother must have hated me. And Carl brings back what his mom said, no, she didn't hate you. And then that's like what he needed to hear. And of course he says, when you get back, will you stay with me? And he squeezes his hand. And then of course Carl says yes. And he has this single tear drop down his cheek. My fear is that when he gets back, Schubert's going to be dead. That's my fear. My fear is that we had this beautiful tender moment between father and son. He got to get his amends, say what he needed to say about his mom. He sends Carl on his way, and when Carl gets back, he's going to be dead. That's my fear. I mean, maybe it will get Carl involved with Lottie and all them. We don't know, but it's just so damn sad. I'm like, come on, man. And then we go to Rudy. I really like Rudy talking with Nina under the lamp, using his psychology voodoo to try to get her to react to the book. I love this moment with Gillen. It's really, really good. I also think Nina looks amazing in a turtleneck dress. Not an easy look to pull off. She does great with it. But yeah, he talks about, what do you feel when you look at this picture book? And he says, Obluda, okay. Now see, it says on there, Chiara Niva Svejmeno. That looks like an I. That does not look like a damn T. T my ass. If you look at the title of that book, it does not look like a T. No. Tell me whatever you can, just the top of your head. But she seems pretty disturbed by the book. Now, it had to be something from their childhood, because when they got past the border, he went to Kinderheim and she went to a different orphanage. They probably did not see the same book at that orphanage, especially if it was something from Czechoslovakia. That doesn't seem legit. So it seems like it's a book from when they were still in Prague, in Czechoslovakia. So what's up with the book? What's up with that? And then she like freaks out. And Reichwein and Lottie are like, I don't know if we should, talk to her about this anymore, because she seems pretty disturbed by it. Now, give Nina props. She did not faint when talking about the book. Johan fainted. She did not. So our girl toughed it out. And then Rudy's like, just a little bit more. Like Rudy's used to dealing with people that are kind of like this. So Rudy's like, no, keep going. So she says 3 frogs. Whatever 3 frogs mean. She says 3 frogs. And he's like, 3? And Reichwein's like, why? They're like, what do you mean? But she can't, and a picture. 3 frogs. And he's like, there's not a picture of frogs in that book. So what do we do? There's nowhere there in any of that. And then it's just too much. So, okay. We have 3 frogs. 3 frogs and a book. Or a picture. There's a picture. And there's a bridge. And we'll get the name of the bridge here in a minute. 3 frogs, a picture, and a bridge. Now, I don't know what the 3 frogs could mean. Could the 3 frogs be Johan, Nina, and Tenma? Could they be... I don't know. I feel like we don't know enough about the frogs. I mean, there's lots of fairy tales that involve frogs, like the Princess and the Frog and everything, but are the frogs an omen of there being like a plague? Like you have the story of Moses and the frogs and locusts and everything. You think 3 frogs, you mean like 3 wise men? Is it a combination of it where you have the 3 wise men and the plague, like 3 ominous individuals to come and kill everybody? I don't know. I feel like we need a little bit more information, a little bit more to drive something else. But yeah, they finish talking in that moment. And then they go to the restaurant. Dieter is very observant too at the restaurant. Like he's watching Nina very closely. And I feel like Dieter never says it, but I feel like maybe Dieter suspects there's like a little bit of Tenma in her, because when she leaves, that's very much like what Tenma did. And Dieter is not going to let that happen again. He already let somebody he cares for leave, like Tenma. He's not going to let Nina leave in the same fashion. So I feel like when Dieter watches her at the restaurant, he's thinking, oh, you are giving red flags like Tenma that you're about to run away. And Dieter's like, I got my backpack packed. I got my soccer ball. We're ready to go. We're on our way. But they're sitting there talking about what to do. And they're like, we can't just bring proof to the police. We got to go straight to the superiors. Don't know what that'll do. And they're like, we need to find information about Johan. So I like the idea that we've got this squad and Carl's gone for the moment. But Nina's like, we're out of time. And the moment she says that, like it cuts over to Dieter and he's like has the terrified look on his face too. Dieter and Nina both realize that there's no time to be waiting on this. They need to go act. And both Dieter and Nina want to go see Tenma and want to help him. So it sets up that really, really well. I like what it does there. But yeah, and Reichwein says, he's like, I understand how you feel. Johan killed a friend of mine, but I don't want that to happen to you. So just trust us. We can do this together. He's like, I'm not going to back down. I believe him, right? But here's the thing. Nina says the frogs. She says they're a story of fairy tale. And that's when she wakes up and knows where he's going. Now, whatever that means, I don't know. What is the thing with the 3 frogs? I don't know. There were the 3 doctors, the director at the hospital and the 2 other doctors that died. Could that be tied to the 3 frogs? Could that be tied to it? I don't know. But Johan's just leaving these people on a damn goose chase, right? Leading them on a goose chase. And that's when we get Carl and Tenma meeting at the train station. He's like, the man who tried to assassinate your father, that's what the police is telling you, right? He's like, I've been watching you for 3 days on top of the building to make sure the police aren't trailing you so that I know I'm not going to get caught by talking to you, right? So that's when he's like, I need to know the message. And he's like, hang on. And so then, yeah, he gets him out of there, and he talks about, here we go. He wrote the message down on a piece of paper, and it said, Seedock Bridge. Seedock Bridge. Now, what Seedock Bridge is, we don't know. I could probably look it up on Google or a search engine right now, but I'm not going to, because I'm afraid if I type in Seedock Bridge, I'm afraid the first search is going to be like, monster spoiler. So I'm afraid it's going to be a spoiler. So don't worry. You don't have to tell me. It's all right. I'm sure that Seedock Bridge, they're going to tell us, in the next couple episodes, what's up with that. But Seedock Bridge, okay? 3 frogs. And then my father said this. If the monster you're chasing is a twin, their mother is alive and is living in Prague. So somehow, here's the thing. Schubert knows the mom is alive and in Prague. Now, I'm wondering if Schubert, like with Margot Langer, with all the information that Carl read on Margot, if Schubert had pieced that together from the information he'd been researching about her and her death, maybe, and he knew about that, maybe about her friend, she could have told him about the friend too. So, but that look on Tenma's face when he's like, oh my God, and it's just twitching in his hand. So what's the deal with Prague? What is it? Because he's just like twitching like, so Schubert knew about Johan. And it's just like, Tenma's reaction is very interesting because it's like he has the same reaction as Nina. Like they all come to the same conclusion. But why do they have to go to the bridge? What's with the 3 frogs? Are they all going to go to Prague to meet the mom? Is that going to be part of this series? Are we going to like do a trek to Prague to see her? Like, what do we do with this? And then the episode ends. And we have it pick up where it left off, and we see the little boy at the very end be all happy and healthy at the end. He's just happy and healthy with this little monster inside of him. Oh my God. Yep. So, a very satisfying episode indeed. I'm glad that we now have the next leg of our journey. It seems like Nina and Tenma and Dieter are off to the same place. Maybe Johan's going to be there too. I don't know. I feel like maybe Carl will go back and tell them all as well. I would like Carl to go back and tell and team up with Lottie and all of them to help them try to find and like try to, for all of them to get to Johan on different fronts. That would be really good. Rudy has learned his lesson to not trust Lunge, so that's good. But yeah, what's great about this is we have more fairy tale elements. I have no clue where the story is going to from here, and I'm really excited about that. So, in the meantime, I hope you all enjoyed this discussion and reaction. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. Please, no hints or clues or spoilers. But man, y'all, I'm excited. So, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Monster. Bye!